So here we are with Chef Barton Seaver, formerly of, well, should I say formerly of Cafe St. X, I guess that's appropriate, Bar Pilar, and Washington's Hook.
Yeah.
But now I understand that there's a life change going on. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, a lot of the work in the restaurants was really taking me more towards the advocate role and really speaking about the future of sustainability and sustainability as it was incorporated into restaurants. White tablecloth restaurants will forever be the example, never the practice. White tablecloth restaurants only represent a small fraction of the overall percent of business done in America in food service.
Right.
And I think it's very important, and that's just where my passion has been calling. And I've been all over the world and have a couple of new projects working right now in terms of building on the principles of sustainability so that we go beyond sustainable, which is to say, let's keep what we have.
Right.
But in fact, we've already taken so much of what there was, and to actually invest and create regenerative technologies and then ultimately restorative foods that bring us back to the abundance that we once had.
Right, because obviously you've made sort of, I guess, an impact talking about the issue of overfishing, of, you know, as you said, sort of the usage of those resources which is not sustainable. You mentioned off camera that you're going to work with the government of Ireland. You're working with projects in West Africa. Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
Well, there's a couple of interesting things. I'm going to be on 4 different continents this month alone. And,
okay.
Life has gotten quite exciting in many time zones. But especially with the West African fisheries, really encouraging local stewardship of the resources there so that promoting food security and social justice issues all at the same time. And then there's a lot of really interesting work happening right now in the aquaculture field in terms of integrative technology. That's a really interesting idea behind sustainability right now is not trying to find more fish, but it's trying to figure out how to feed more people with the fish that we have. Is the greater reality of what sustainability represents right now. And then, we were talking about the sustainable, restorative, regenerative technologies, we get to move beyond that. But aquaculture is here to stay.
For sure.
And with an ever-growing population, it's absolutely necessary that rather than fight against aquaculture, we should work with them to make their practices better so that we can sustain their practices throughout the next few generations.
And on that theme, do you think that there's an issue within what you term the white tablecloth community with regards to the quality differences or perceived quality differences between wild fish and aquaculture product?
Yeah, there certainly is, and a lot of the wild fish purveyors right now are really promoting touting the benefits of wild fish, and they're absolutely right. Wild fish can be absolutely delicious, but it has its place of romance and its charm on our menus. But the bottom line is that's white tablecloth, and many of the larger food service operations, think about hotels, schools, universities. How many more meals are fed through those systems every day that don't have the ability to afford wild Alaskan salmon?
Yeah.
They simply can't. And so that's why we have to really invest in these new, bringing forward these new aquaculture techniques that are going to give us better tasting fish, that are going to more closely mimic the wild product. I think the next steps are really to the nonprofit world, the non-governmental organizations such as Monterey Bay Aquarium, Blue Ocean Institute, Shedd Aquarium, so many of these groups that have done such amazing work at bringing the ideas of sustainable fisheries into the cultural lexicon. And we're almost at that all-important Gladwell's tipping point now, that the majority of consumers, they're almost there. They're almost demanding sustainable seafood. And they have those wallet guides. Blue Ocean, Monterey Bay Aquarium produces a very popular wallet guide for consumers with a red, yellow, and green list species of what we should and should not buy. As well as Blue Ocean has a wonderful service of a text message. You text 30644 with the word fish and the species name. It'll shoot back all the information you need to make an educated choice. But as the consumer has all of this information in their hands, okay, education is with the consumer is now empowered.
Right.
The bottom line is I can't eat one of those wallet guides for dinner, so where's the fish? Well, the fish is in the marketplace. And I think that there needs to be a real progression towards helping larger companies to create the ability to buy into sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
So that they're not just going to label something sustainable because the market isn't set up to provide it right now.
Mm-hmm.
The market is still, you still see bluefin tuna on menus.
Mm-hmm.
Bluefin tuna is akin to putting panda on your menu.
Right.
Or gorilla. It absolutely simply would not happen. We're so close. And there's still such startling realities that face us within the marketplace. And rather than trying to get the marketplace to change 100% sustainable tomorrow, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Plastic bags aren't going to happen. They're not just going to go away.
Right.
We have to laud the progress of these groups as they begin to desire these changes.
Mm-hmm.
We have to enable the 5% change. 5% change for a group like Marriott represents big progress.
Yeah.
And I think that's it, the next 12 months, to get back to the original question quite circuitously, would be to really help create relationships between these nonprofit understandings, the ideologies of the cultural change that
mm-hmm.
needs to happen to enable sustainability, to infiltrate into the market approach. Well, and I think we're going to see a lot of that start to happen in this, the global food crisis that's impending upon us right now is really going to push a lot of companies to invest in their own food security,
mm-hmm.
with the threat of many of the shrimp producing nations nationalizing their property, nationalizing their resources.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, why should the Philippine people be giving away their resources through shrimp farming to America?
Right.
That doesn't make a whole lot of sense if the Filipino people aren't first accounted for,
right.
and their food security issues are met. I'm not advocating, a world
nationalization,
world chaos here, but the shrimp industry is a good one to use as an example. There's $4.1 billion. It's absolutely enormous how many shrimp there are, and with the rising cost of fuel, transportation, the insecurity of all of this, I think you're going to start to see some of these groups look towards, hey, how can we grow our own shrimp, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's going to be very interesting to see when those groups also say, well, Monterey Bay Aquarium or Blue Ocean Institute, can you help us raise them the right way? We'll provide the capital, these people come together, everyone comes together, and all of a sudden, this big hotel firm, that chain that needs millions of pounds of shrimp in December, all of a sudden has a supply chain that is set up to meet specifically its own design. And,
right.
And I think it's a very important crux in that our cultural sort of identity is not weak, but it's vulnerable to these sort of ideological changes right now. We see in ourselves a pattern of consumption that has not been sustainable.
Right.
That's the larger change which we seek, is that change in the consumption patterns, that change to largely the dangerous cultural misunderstanding that we have with our natural resources, and the fact that we cannot sustain this continued consumption. And a lot of that will see green roofs. You will see,
mm-hmm.
I think, inner city farms and vertical farming and people plotting, getting back to the Victory Garden idea.
Yeah.
And what's so funny about the organic idea and a lot of these sustainable fisheries ideas and a lot of this is riding on the coattails of the sustainable agriculture movement. Mm-hmm. And you look at this huge hype over organic. Organic label didn't exist legally until 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And within 8 years, look at the change that's happened. We've already gone way past organic, and now the people who are at the forefront are using sustainable or local or loco-sustainable or locovores. Okay, what happened to organic? It's not even a decade old.
Right.
Change is the word of this decade, certainly.
Yeah.
And you see that in the media every day now. But you begin to realize that 60, 80 years ago, organic was all we had. Seasonal was all we had. Local was all we had. In fact, we were a slave to it. Organic is not a new idea. It's just a new identity for an old concept.
Are higher dining establishments going to be called to task on that sort of behavior, do you think? Just switching gears here for a moment and thinking about, okay, we know that at the base we need a change, but do you think it's going to start affecting in a substantial way some of these higher end restaurants?
I think it will, but more so in the stratification of the price levels. Mm-hmm. I think the entire purpose of the sustainable foods movement is to de-stratify the ethic of sustainable foods. Whole Foods is simply not good enough. Whole Foods is not going to feed the world with the 10% of sustainable foods that it actually carries.
And certainly not at their prices.
And certainly not at their prices. So when you have, getting back to sort of the fish question, which is, I guess, my sort of inlet into the sustainable foods movement mostly, is that you're going to begin to see the prices for wild fish skyrocket. As the real price of those fish is going to be reflected on menus. Meaning, as subsidies are beginning to be cut, even in states in countries where the fish is sustainable, there are huge oil and transportation subsidies and shipping subsidies that dramatically reduce the real cost.
Right.
And so we're paying for that fish. All of us are paying for that fish with our tax dollars before we go to Whole Foods and buy it for $27 a pound. So in reality, it's $35, $40 a pound. I think that lobsters are never going to be stop being served in California. And honestly, there are some models that show foods from other locales are actually it's actually more efficient to ship them in bulk than it is for 100 people in SUVs to drive to a farmer's market and then all drive back out. And there's some very real research that's being done right now to expose the realities of our food structure and some of the efficiencies that we have built into it. And so the bottom line of sustainability is there's nothing black and white about it.
Yeah, complex issues.
It's incredibly complex. And I think the backbone, this is something I've long said, is the backbone of sustainability is flexibility. So we have to be willing to admit that what we know now may be wrong, and it might be right. But I think what's really cool is that humanity as a race, or maybe just the developed first world, is coming to a humbling sort of peak or pinnacle or epiphany in which we might just have to realize that the best way to do things might be the way we did them yesterday.
Right.
And that's a very intriguing thought to the psychology of our nations, and our politics, and our consumer habits. It's exciting to see this all happen.
Absolutely. And it is grabbing hold. It truly is grabbing hold.
And restaurants will forever tout the exotic. Chefs are highly individualistic, and the very best top-tier restaurants will always continue to provide for that niche. And I think in a large part that's acceptable.
Right.
As long as the real cost is truly mirrored in the cost of the food.
And as you stated, that really is not the crux of the matter. That's sort of that 1% top of the pyramid. What's much more important is addressing it across the base.
Absolutely.
And making sure that the general consumer in there every day is aware and caring.
But chefs are rock stars, and
more and more
people are flocking to chefs, and with 2 out of 3 meals being eaten out of the house in America every day in the majority of households, it's not even who we're listening to. It's just who's talking at this point.
Yeah.
Is chefs, is the large-scale food service. That's who's running the dialogue about food culture in America. And I think it's neat to be, amongst a group of chefs who have, especially there are scores of people who've come before me. I'm just repeating old ideas. Truly visionary people who've been working on these subjects for 40 years or more, going back through generations. And it's cool that white tablecloths are really going to lead the charge, but then are really going to have to pass it off and expect that, and hold a lot of these sort of larger food service operations accountable. Yeah,
and that's where you come in.
Well, that's where we come in through consumer education. Because white tablecloths can't hold them accountable, but the consumer can. And white tablecloth chefs can educate the consumer. As I stated earlier, that sustainability begins with people. If you look at fisheries, what is a fishery? It is one man reaching into the water to take a fish in order to feed another man. So 2/3 of this equation is human. Leave the fish out of this. The fish are fine. We need to really focus on people, and I've been studying a lot of sort of Carnegie and Rockefeller and their sort of gospels of philanthropy and the American way of charity. And charity is really the betterment of the individual, and philanthropy is the betterment of the race. through tools, through teaching, through understanding, through creating cultural mythologies that enable successful growth and safety and security and the things that really matter to us. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to see a real shift away from charity and more towards, feeding meals to homeless people is fine and great and noble, but it simply doesn't fix anything.
Right, it doesn't advance us.
Really creating systems that empower people, that not only empower people but then support people. Mm-hmm. We can all gather around a person and shove them and push them until they earn their first paycheck, and then we can congratulate them, but it's not until they earn their second paycheck or their 10th paycheck that they have succeeded.
Right.
And setting up the cultural, the sociological, and the economic stimulus and support networks to really support those within our communities and see ourselves as a united front, irregardless of social standing. Mm-hmm. It's also exciting to see people in America really looking around them and really getting to know the people around them. The most important person you'll ever have in your life is your neighbor. Mm-hmm. Outside of your family circle is those around you, and it's incredibly important to build community and to and food luckily has a great part in that.
Yeah, it's an easy way to get your neighbor to come over and have a discussion.
Well, if you look at American tradition, a new person moves into the neighborhood. What do? You stop by with a bucket of fried chicken or an apple pie or something just to welcome them to the neighborhood. That food and that communion it creates is so powerful, and I think that's it makes the job of food advocacy easy because people get it.
Yeah.
I don't have to talk to you about politics. Here's an apple pie. Ooh,
it's visceral.
Yeah, and it's real and. Yeah, it makes sense to all of us. So.
Fantastic. Barton Seaver, now journeyman for advocacy of sustainable issues, particularly in the field of all things from the sea. Thank you so much for joining us at Devour. We really appreciate it. That was enlightening, encouraging, and we wish you all the best. And
cool. Thanks for your time.
Thanks again.